I'm going to start off, and I want to start off by asking everyone a question. So how many of you have ever, when reading a book, instead of just going all the way through, you skip to the end and you look to read how the story ends before you finish the book? Anyone? Okay. Some are a little shy about that. Well, I'm here to tell you that I not only did that, that became my regular practice. When I was a young boy, I remember my parents, both of them would read me books, and every time they would read me a story, all I could really focus on was, how did the story end? How did the story end? And it got to the point that when before my parents would come in to read me the book, a number of times I would go and I would get the book and I would open up the book and I would go to the last 2 pages and I would see how it ended. Because the entire time that I was listening to that story, I wanted to know how it ended. And that became a bit of a mantra for me. It was something that was really ingrained in me, and it became a mantra that was really what guided me in business. And that was, tell me how the story ends, and I'll tell you if I want to hear the story. Now, you know how my story ends. So Google acquired my company. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and tell you the story. And then after I do that, Raymond is going to come up and he's going to walk you through a process to explain how we do what we do and what the concept of potential capital is. And there's, as Aaron mentioned, there's a connection between the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a video that'll give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nik Software.
You have 2 weeks.
So that was Snapseed, and that was one of the main reasons that Google acquired us. So you know that Google acquired Nik in 2012. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nik Software. Nik Software was more than a company that made Snapseed. The press, and when the acquisition was really publicized, it was interesting because we presented Snapseed as a separate, almost as a separate entity. It was a product group, it was something that was going to be a little different than what we were as Nik Software, because Nik Software actually was established in 1995. And in 1998 is when I got involved, when it was just the founder, Niels Kokomor, and he had this idea to create technologies that would be for photographs. He had done quite a bit in the digital imaging field. And when I came on, I listened to what he had to offer, what his ideas were, and he's a true innovator. He is a classic innovator by definition. And what he came up with was a collection of technologies and tools for digital photography. And in 1998, we began the development of what is now known as the Nik Software Complete Collection. Now it's known as the Google Complete Collection. Beyond that, if we move forward to 2006, we ended up engaging in a relationship with Nikon Corporation, and we ultimately developed Capture NX, which is Nikon's professional photo editing software that some would compare it to, or in the class of Photoshop. I wouldn't say it compares with Photoshop, although it is used for very similar purposes for photographers. And then, of course, you know, in 2011, the progression is we went in and developed a mobile app, Snapseed, which was, we released it on iOS for iPad and ultimately for the iPhone, and now it's also available on Android, especially because Google acquired it. So that was the progression of the company. I want to go back and give you my perspective of how did I do this? Where did I reach for? I had a conversation with Erin, and she asked the question. She asked me, so where'd you get this perspective? In 1994, incidentally, I was here. I was at USD. I was MIB, or an international MBA student, and I was approached. Actually, Dr. Greg Gazda, who was the head of the program, was approached and asked, who would you recommend as a student to go work for the Department of Commerce? They were looking for someone to come and work for them, and they had a special program where they could bring one student in that would work and play a role to support international trade specialists. And he recommended me. Obviously, I got the job. And I went in, and within a period of time, I actually became an international trade specialist. And it was a great experience. This is where I really developed a perspective, because at the Department of Commerce, as an international trade specialist, as Aaron mentioned, what I got to do was to work with a base of companies. There were about 100 in my portfolio, so to speak, and my client base. And what I got to do with them is we would use our network to look overseas and to look for opportunities for them, and then help them pursue licensing, joint ventures, distribution deals, various types of services that would look at opportunities and present those opportunities, help companies find opportunities, and then help them actually execute. And this is where I really developed my perspective. I saw that opportunities overseas, which incidentally, if you haven't done business overseas and you have done it domestically, what you see is that it's very different, not just from country to country, but the types of opportunities and the way that you access them. And that's what was extraordinary. And what that did for me was not just enable me to see opportunity, but it enabled me to understand a very important concept. And that is that potential is born in opportunity. The potential of my clients was born in these opportunities. And that's something that stuck with me. So if we fast forward 18 years, Google bought potential. Pure and simple. Both realized potential and unrealized potential. That's what companies do when they do an acquisition. For the most part, there are some acquisitions that they will do for resource purposes. But in this case, it was a very classic 1 + 1 = 3 or 1 + 1 = 5. There was the realized potential was the patents and the products and the technology that we had in the pipeline. And the unrealized potential is what could be done with this. And it's exactly what Google keyed in on. Now, there are a number of questions that I get asked after the sale to Google. The first one is, how did you do this? And that may be the question that some of you are asking. And the second question is, what do I need to do this? And that's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to share with you. So the first thing is innovation. To realize your potential, it takes innovation. To realize potential, you need innovation. At Nik Software, innovation was the foundation of who we were. We had an extraordinarily innovative founder who came up with ideas, and he drove a creative process. And innovation was just what he was all about. We had an innovative patent portfolio which he drove. We had innovative product base. Everything that we did was innovative. Innovation was in the company. The first question, coming back to that, is how did you do this? Now, what most people are asking is actually not how did you do this? What they're really asking is how can I do this? And some people actually ask the question, but most people say how did you do this? And then when we engage in a discussion, they really want to know, well, how can I do this? And I have a very, very simple answer for you. Dream backwards. Dream backwards because you need a strategy. Strategy is dreaming backwards, and strategy comes from dreaming backwards. Entry Ventures is a strategic investment firm, and at the core of what we are is strategy. In the process of doing all of this, in the process of growing the company, the one question that you might ask if I go through a process of dreaming backwards is, what did I dream of? There was one thing that I dreamt of constantly, and that's world class. World class was my guiding principle in everything that we did. I want to ask you a question because we're going to talk a little bit about world class. How many of you can think of a world class company? Let me see your hands. Do any come to mind? I'm sorry? Microsoft, okay. Any others? IBM. Okay. I can think of a number of companies. Now, I don't have IBM or Microsoft, but these are the ones that came to mind for me. And Apple is one that probably is at the top of the list for me, and I think for a number of people as well. What's interesting about world class, though, is that everyone seems to have a different perspective or a different definition of world class. So I'm going to share with you I won't go so far as to say it's a definition of world class, but my explanation. How do I understand or how do I explain world class? And there's really just there's two ways that I explain it. Two ways that I describe recognizing it or how you reach it. The first is do it so well that no one questions if it can be done better. That's the first. The second is do it so well that everyone wants to be a part of it. Now, one of the companies that comes to mind on the list before, all the logos that were up there, is Harley-Davidson. Now, if you know Harley-Davidson, what you know, and that is truly a world-class company, what you know about Harley-Davidson is if you are a customer of motorcycles in that class, if you are in that demographic, you want to be a part of it. It's a movement. That brand drives a movement, and that is a world-class company. So how were we world-class? What did we do that was world-class? Very simple. Everything. Everything that we did at Nik Software was world-class, and it had to be world-class. That was that principle. That's what guided everyone. We didn't do it if it wasn't world-class. Engineering, design, user experience, customer service, there was no exception. Everything was world-class. It had to be world-class or we didn't do it. But world-class alone was not enough for us. Innovation and strategy was not enough for us to realize our potential. We needed investment. So we needed money. Investment is the fuel for ventures. We absolutely had to have investment, especially where we were. And I'm going to take you back to where we were in 2003 just to give you some perspective. In 2003, we had self-funded, which means we had created our products, sold our products, and that funded everything. We had no debt, we had no venture capital, and we had no outside investors. We had very innovative products. We had released products and got American Photo Editor's Choice Award. We got just about every Editor's Choice Award that was out there. And we had about $2 million in revenue, which was pretty good for a company of our size. And we had some great patents. We had some unique patents. We had not a large number of patents, but we had some very unique, solid patents. And for me, one of the things that is among the most important things is that we had a solid brand. We had a brand that represented everything that we had developed. And that's key, because that's what everyone looks at in the market and even these partner companies. Aaron mentioned some of the partner companies that we had. We partnered with some of the top companies. And a big part of that was because the market looked at us. The market respected the brand. And that brand represented everything that we had. That was world class. So we needed investment. If we really wanted to scale, we needed investment. So we looked for not just investment, we looked for a strategic partner. Because again, we had done a good job of growing, but we really hadn't scaled. So 4 of the companies that we actually ended up talking with, we approached some. Quickly, we actually entered into discussions with Adobe, Nikon, Olympus, and Microsoft. And we had deeper discussions with some, more than others. And in the end, which you may have guessed or you may have already figured out, that we took investment from Nikon. We took a minority investment from Nikon so that we could have the money that we needed and a strategic partner. Now, I'm going to take just a moment to go through the process of what that investment looked like and how did we approach valuation. And what's interesting is that the approach to valuing Nik was different than a lot. We went to Tokyo, and it was a very different experience for me because I had never been to Tokyo before this trip. And we went in and we sat down and we listened to an introduction from the Nikon team. And it was startling because when they came in, they didn't give me a chance to go through, or they didn't give us a chance to go through and present the valuation. What they did was they engaged in a conversation, and it wasn't intentional, but they engaged in a conversation, and it was very friendly. And then at one point, one of the more senior members of the team, and there were 8 people on the other side of the table, and there were 2 people on our side of the table. So it was just actually myself and Ed Sanchez, who was also a USD alum in the same program. And we were sitting on the other side of the table, and one of the more senior members on the other side said, "Mr. Slater, could you tell me what you believe that Nik Software is worth?" And I was caught off guard because we had worked on this beautiful presentation, and we were going to tell them a story. And in the end, we were going to tell them that the company was worth $62.5 million. And I told them that. I said $62.5 million. Now, in retrospect, what I now realize, many years later, is that that member of the Nikon team actually asked me how the story ended before I told him the story. And it did catch me off guard. It rattled me a little bit. And I watched the reaction as I told them $62.5 million. And the 8 people on the other side of the table started to talk to each other quietly, looked at each other. There was a little bit of chuckling, and then one the more senior member who had been doing most of the talking, said, "Mr. Slater, would you please tell us why you believe your company is worth $62.5 million?" Now, we didn't say 62, we didn't say 63. We said $62.5 million. And if you keep in mind of where our revenue was, it was at right around $2 million. So that's 30 times revenue. Now, if you understand multiples at all, that's way up there. We had no profits. Now, we had no debt, but we had no profits. And we had, I think, one or two patents we were issuing, but we had one very promising patent. And this is what Nikon was very interested in. This is what we thought was very meaningful from a business perspective, from a valuation perspective. I listened to that, and I wasn't entirely sure what to say because all of my answers were in my presentation. And all I could think about was the foundation of how we did the valuation. And so I looked across the table, and I stood up, and I walked away from the computer that was sitting there, much to the dismay of my business partner, because we had worked on that presentation and rehearsed it. It seemed like an infinite number of times. And I went to the whiteboard, and I drew a triangle, and I said, look, we could spend months going through different valuation methods to value the company. And it's very likely that we're not going to agree on a single number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how we got to the $62.5 million. And we don't have to go through and parse the details of it. You can just understand how we did this. And the first thing that I said was, the first thing that we did was we used a method of triangulation of value. We took what we considered, or what we called, the absolute value of Nik. So this is what you would consider typically you would do with the company. You would figure out what's the value of the company. What we were looking to do is to bring in a couple more variables. So we used various methods and figured out what we believed the company would be worth. Now, what's important to note here, at this time, in 2003, there was a lot going on. Digital photography was just at its, not so much at its infancy, but it was really, really early on, and it was looking to be very, very hot. The transition from film to digital was big, and everyone was clamoring for it. All the hardware manufacturers, Microsoft, it was very big for Microsoft because photography represents memories, and actually that is, back then, photography was social. Photography was social before social was social. And this is why it's so powerful, and it was. So for all these companies, they're looking at how do I get in photography? What is going to get us to capture these customers? And so Nikon and other companies were very much looking to have an advantage and to grow the customer base and to capture customers in digital photography. And Nikon was probably at the top of the list. And so we looked at what's the value of Nik to Nikon. Now, a little bit of background about Nikon. Nikon, of all of the camera manufacturers out there, does an extraordinary job in developing software. The issue is that they're a hardware manufacturer, and so software is very secondary to them. What they needed was a software company. They needed a software perspective and the technologies that we had, and we knew that. And there was other interest in the company at the time. And so when I was up at the board, that second variable was, I was saying, we consider not just the absolute value of Nik, but we consider what's the value to Nikon. And at the time, Nikon was about a $5 billion a year company. And quite a bit of that was the imaging company, which makes the cameras and which is the photography business. And so we basically looked at that and said, well, if software makes a 10% difference in the company, and we knew it would, so did Nikon, so did everyone else, because the direction that photography was going was in software. If you look at where photography is now, photography is digital, it's software. In all the devices that you carry, that's all software. In the cameras back then, there was software. So it was all about software. And we had the technology. We had the patents. We had key patents when it came to editing and manipulating photos. So we looked at this and said, there's significant value to Nikon. If it makes a 10% difference, that's $500 million. Then the third variable was we looked at what's the negative value to Nikon. We're sitting there with them. What's the negative value to Nikon if we don't go to them? What if we do go to a competitor? If we go to another software company, how would that impact their customer acquisition and their growth? And that may be greater. That may be greater than the value to them. So I summed up the presentation by saying, and it was literally just sketching this very crudely on a whiteboard, and I said, so the $62.5 million is an amalgamation of these. You can plug in your numbers, we plugged in ours, and that's how we got it. And that was not necessarily the end of the discussion, but that was the end of the presentation. And we never actually presented the presentation that we spent weeks on. It didn't turn out so bad. We proposed a value of $62.5 million, and we actually got a valuation of $30 million, which was 14 times revenue. Now, if you look at valuation multiples, that's still not too bad. So, we had our investment. We had to reach the world. So, around 2005 is when we closed the deal, and we had to reach the world because what we needed was, we wanted to lead, innovate, and change digital photography. But what we needed was scale. And to reach the world, we had to scale. That was the only way. Up until this point, we had grown. And there's a very important differentiation between scaling and growing, or growing and scaling. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about that later. We had grown, but we had never scaled. We had never reached massive markets. We had reached who we had aimed to, but we didn't reach the broader market. So as we progressed and we looked at the market, what we did is we did what just about every other company does. And you may recognize this or understand the concept of this. This is just market segmentation. This isn't complicated. What we did is we went through and we looked at where are our customers, where are the demographics that we approach. First of all, professionals were really big for us. That's what we had been doing. That's how we had generated our revenue. Then the goal was, at the time, in 2006, we started developing Capture NX, which is a desktop application. And we looked at this as, okay, we're going to approach the professionals, we're going to approach the hobbyists and the amateurs, which are kind of really passionate consumers. And then eventually we would get to the consumers. And the consumers, we were going to get through what we now know as Snapseed, which was really back in concept development because of this segmentation. Because of the segmentation, we had to go after them. We thought that we could scale by just going after the top portion of the pyramid for a while. But that really wasn't scaling. There was only so many people up there, and they were hard to get to. And the other challenge is that the markets are segmented. So that meant that professionals were buying differently than hobbyists for the most part. And the same thing with amateurs. So it was really inefficient. You couldn't just go after and capture all of them at once. There was another significant challenge for us. And as we moved along, we watched that the market was changing. And this was the biggest realization for us, is that the market was changing faster than we thought it would. And we had to constantly change. Consumers were driving digital, and consumers were driving value in digital. And I can look back now and tell you that's exactly what happened. Consumers were and are the ones that drove value in photography, in digital photography, and now we're seeing that again in social media. Consumers are the point of value. So we saw this. And what we saw and realized is that mobile would become the forefront of photography. We started way back, it must have been for us way back when devices came out. I believe it was around 2008. There were phones that had touch screens, but you touched them with a pen. We started prototyping back then. and doing everything we could. It was a horrible customer experience, but we were trying. We knew that ultimately these devices would be where photography is. So we had to do something. We inverted our model. We inverted our pyramid, and we did a couple of things. The first thing that we did was we blended the market. So in other words, we stopped segmenting, and that was very important. So by blending our demographics, we had the concept of going after the broader market. Now, the broader market enabled us to do a number of things. The most important thing that it enabled us to do is to go after everyone regardless of the demographic. So we went after everyone, and here's what's really important about that, is that the broader market in early stage adoption does not segment. So if we look at professionals, hobbyists, amateurs, and consumers, in this early stage of the technology, they don't segment. So in digital photography, everyone used a digital camera the same way in mobile. In the consumer market, or the consumers, the amateurs, the hobbyists, and the professionals. So when iPhones came out and they had decent cameras in it, and there were products and there were apps, everyone was really, in the early stages, everyone was using it the same way. We had hundreds of thousands of professional customers, and we watched how they used mobile. And it wasn't any different than the way that anyone else did. And so this is what I mean by the broader market doesn't segment in early stage adoption of a technology. It's the same in virtually every other technology or technology or category. When you see this progression, pretty much everyone uses it the same way. And this is what was key for us. When we created Snapseed, we intentionally, by blending those demographics, we intentionally created a broader market product, not a consumer product. Had we created a consumer product, I guarantee you we would have not been successful. The reason is because every other product out there was a consumer product. There were professional products which no consumer could ever figure out how to use, and there were consumer products that no professional would touch. The result of we took $500, so we had software that we sold for $500. And we took that technology, and it took time, and then we put it down into a $5 app. So essentially, we sold $500 retail of software for $5. Talk about nerve-wracking. And that was something that we had to think about, and it was a huge bet. Now, it wasn't the desktop, so it wasn't going to be directly competitive. What it was going to do, though, is put very valuable technology in the hands of a lot of people for not a lot of money. And to really make money, you got to get it to a lot of people. You got to scale. And that's what this was about. So the result was Snapseed was a world-class product that everyone wanted to be a part of. Everyone wanted the product, and everyone wanted to be a part of it. By making a broader market product, it had a number of effects. One, you had professionals validating this in the consumer market. You had consumers validating it. So everyone was talking about this. And there were some people that didn't like it. The vast majority of the market did. And within 6 months, Snapseed received Apple's iPad App of the Year in 2011 and we had 6 million customers. We had 6 million customers within 6 months. And within 12 months, we had 9 million customers. We had scale. We had what we had been looking for years, for over a decade, and that was scale. We had grown, so if you think back to where we were from 98 to 2003, we grew. We didn't have scale. We had hundreds of thousands of customers. We didn't have millions of customers. And the reason is, in our case, was because it was the segmentation and what we were going after. We had a very good business. We didn't have scale, and that was important. So on our path to Google and realizing our potential, we grew through innovation, strategy, investment, and scalability. Those 4 things. Now, I think this is probably a good time to bring up Raymond, because he's going to talk about Entry Ventures and give you a bit of a segue from this and what Nik Software was and the model that was born in Nik Software and the foundation of Entry Ventures and what we do. So.
Thanks, Michael. Entry Ventures. I think it's always good to hear a story like Michael shared with us. And I can tell you as a guy that's been in this business and I've done a couple of companies myself, that he gave wonderful, wonderful advice. The way of running a business, the way of getting an exit that you are dreaming backwards of is both simple and complex. And I think the simple way that Michael explained it was the part that when we connected that really excited me, because there's a great model in that. So I hope you took some notes, or I know it will be on the website as well, but there's some wonderful things. So thanks, Michael, for that. So Entry Ventures, it's one thing telling this wonderful story. I mean, Michael, I've told you about a couple of questions people asking, how did you do this? Or, more famously, please tell me how I can do this myself. And it's good to have that narrative, but what do you do after that? What happens after you had this phenomenal exit? You dreamed backwards on it. Michael told you the story. 2004, it was 1994 when you were here. 2005, I think, when the investment dropped from Nikon, and 2012 when Google finally dropped. So what's now? So Entry Ventures was created just after that, just after Michael had his exit. It's something he dreamt about a lot, and something that I became involved with as well. And the idea is, how do we take this model and move forward with it? It worked once, it worked spectacular. What can we do now with it? So Entry Ventures, in a sense, is me telling you the story on how we're not just talking the talk, but how we are continuing to walk the walk. And Entry Ventures is thus a company that we are moving away from venture capital. Not that we hate it, but it's just not who we are. And we're moving towards potential capital. Michael explained potentiality, and I'm going to take that same model, and don't worry, I only have 62.5 slides. The 0.5 is the most important one, but no, it's only 5 slides, so I won't take a lot of your time. And quickly just show you what we are doing currently. Entry Ventures still have the same dream. We still have the same dream of being world-class, but now we are applying it to multiple organizations. We're an investment firm, we're a strategic investment firm, and we use this model to see and navigate how we can continue with it. So Michael spoke about the foundation. Innovation, strategy, investment, and scalability. We live and breathe by this. So we call it the Entry Ventures Potential Quadrants, EVPQ. It's something that anyone and everyone in our organization know about, because we'll just ask, where does it fit into EVPQ, and what's happening with EVPQ, and where's the progression in EVPQ, because we believe that this model really works. If that's our foundation, I quickly also want to share, because people ask us, what do you do with Entry Ventures? You're now a potential capital firm. When we speak to VCs, they just chuckle, because they say, well, potential capital is just another form of VC. We do believe there's a difference. And if you look at our DNA, I just want to share this with you. Is Entry Ventures, because of the way that Michael saw and grew his company, but because of the way that he dreamt backwards and getting the multiples that he needed, we are in the business of unrealized potential. It's real. It's something that happens across the world. You can read the newspapers weekly, and you'll see people realizing specific potential, and we in that business. That's what Entry Ventures does. To be that, we understand innovative founders. We understand the person that's normally behind it. In the progression that Michael spoke about, it all started with innovation. Niels Kuckerman, that guy that Michael bumped into in 1998, with phenomenal ideas. No patents, no customers, but phenomenal ideas. We understand that we need that human, we need that person to move forward. We love technology. I think you figured that with Nik Software as well. We're technologists, but we believe in human betterment as well. And the potential capital model for us is saying, let's just look at that area as well. Let's just look at what this will do for humanity as well. It seems lofty, but if we stick to our model, we can actually make it work. We love legacy, we love history, we like doing what we do today. Going back 5 years, going back 10 years, what did we do? Why did it work? How can we do it again? Absolutely loves change, so we do both. And then after all is said and done, I think for me the highlight of when I met Michael and for me becoming part of Entry Ventures was that whole dreaming backward scenario. If that's something that you can get a grasp of seeing what I want that end goal to be and me having the steps of putting that in place, that progression is born in strategy, and strategy is still at the core of what Entry Ventures does. So a couple of fun things. Now we say we're a real company and we do strategic investments and we're across the globe. How do we actually do it? You have this wonderful model. So there's a specific progression that helps us and my specific teams and Michael's teams in how to achieve that. And that progression is that it always starts, as his story started with Nik Software, in innovation. There has to be innovation. And that have option is a very easy one. Even in the physicality of receiving a pitch, it's very real. And Michael and I will sit in a pitch, and when you speak to a true innovator, they speak about what they have. They'll tell you immediately, I have this dream, I have this idea. The word have, you just hear it constantly. We'll be 3 minutes into a pitch, and I'll give a sly look to Michael, because if we just hear the word need, and then I don't know this, and the need, then we realize it's maybe not a true innovator, because a true innovator just cannot help but tell you how much they have. Even though they have no customers, they have no patents, they maybe have not even registered a company yet, but they know they have something. So that's what we look for. And I think some of the VC funds will agree with me, and I guess they do, that when you have 100 people pitching, you need to have a very quick way of understanding, do you fall in our model of strategic investment, yes or no? That's the first one. The second part, since we're a strategic investment firm, is we love to be involved in strategy. I think you picked that up from Michael's narrative as well. We like to help them to dream backwards. That's truly what we do. So the second thing that we're looking for, does this innovation truly exist? And is that innovation in need of a crystal clear dreaming backward strategy? And that's also easy to determine. The combination of both, we just intrinsically believe should release investment. Investment, you've heard this before. I don't know if maybe some of your professors have told you, if you're a professor and sitting here, if you've bumped into this, that people say, you don't have to chase money, money will chase you. It's really not that easy. I can tell you that. But if you have true innovation, and if you have a clear strategy, it becomes easier. You'll see the release and the investment community becoming excited about being part of that. So if you have the first two, investments should come, and I think Michael ended his story quite well in explaining how they had everything phenomenal, but because scalability was lacking, that was the last missing part of getting that phenomenal Google exit, because it had to be shown that it can go across the globe, everyone can be part of it, and no one thought they can do it better. So we believe if we put those first three building blocks in place, we should be able to get an operational team in place to get that scalability going. So the EVPQ process truly works for us. Also to remind that all of these blocks are actually just people that we're speaking about. The reason why, it's quite evident what they would be. I just want to tell you about that little litmus test that we do when it comes to EVPQ. In Entry Ventures, we have strict rules. We don't allow an innovator to be the head of the operational team to scale this. Because if you have truly worked with the innovator, you'll realize that they have none of the skills to scale it. And it's something that we want our innovators to realize. And that's why we need a strategy, and that's why we need some capital, and that's why we need to put operational team together. And vice versa, I'll never measure my operational team on the success of their innovation. I measure them on the success of growing to the scale that we want them to be. Another fun one that we have is on strategy and investment, because a lot of times we co-invest, but we don't go and find those investments so that they can alter our strategy. Something that Michael truly believes in, and me too. That's what they did with Nik. They didn't go to Nik to hear from Nik, how should we do software? That's not why they sat in front of them. They had a crystal clear idea of what they needed to do, and investment was there actually to allow that strategy to execute. So, and it's very easy if you have money. It's very easy if you have money to just start to believe in your own strategy. And therefore, we have to be careful, and we use the EVPQ model, and we say the litmus test that we have there is no crossover there, please. You're welcome to co-invest with us, but please know that you will not be allowed to change the strategy. And the same for the strategist. We ask the strategist not to put his money in, please, because the moment that he does this, when he wants his return, he'll alter the strategy just to get the return of the money. So, it's something that EVPQ helped us in understanding, a real way of how we're running our business today. And just to put that in perspective, we're a young firm, 2 years, not even 2 years old, and we've got investments almost in every continent and almost in every field, because we're not driven by segmentation or by specific models. We're driven by potentiality. When we stumble across that innovator, when we stumble across that need for strategy, we normally engage. So the difference for those purists out there, because we do get this a lot, and I can tell you not everyone agrees with me, but what's the difference between being a VC company and a potential capital company? And for us, there are real differences, and I just quickly want to highlight. The biggest one is that we want to find the opportunities in the difficulties that innovator is facing. We believe that the fact that he doesn't know how to do patents, he's not sure how his international structure should look like, where should the holdings company be, should there be a foundation involved, what will we do with multiple bank accounts across the globe? The fact that they don't know these things, that they are facing those difficulties, for us is the opportunity. That's why we're excited. A typical VC will find the difficulties in the opportunity. Oh, this is the wonderful opportunity, but have you thought about this? And that will be difficult. And have you ever think of how to do that? Because they need to create a lower net present value so they can get the biggest return on investment. And we never do that with the innovator. We actually tell them it's possible. We can do so much more than you think. And that is a bit of a different level. And just if we go on the success progression, since we're part of developing and building the strategy, we directly move from strategy into investment way before we go into scalability. And the typical way that a VC also just wants to see it, they'll poke holes and poke holes. You have to present and present. They'll poke holes into that strategy of yours, up until the point that you can prove scalability in the way that they want you to prove it. And once that is done, they'll invest. They say, okay, I'll give you my money. So there is a bit of a difference. I promised you 5 slides, and that's what they were. But that's just to give you the indication of this learning that Michael went through in starting from here, going into Nik Software, and actually ultimately exiting to Google. We are just applying again. And therefore, we do believe it's an active and a well model. And the last slide, before I'm grabbing Michael back up here, is just to say that realizing potential is all about people. I think you picked that up. We don't speak about innovation as much as we speak about an innovator. We don't speak about capital or cash as we speak about investors and co-investments with those people, because it's still real money and people are still behind that. We do know that scalability actually comes down to an operational team, a bunch of people that work a long amount of hours every day to get scalability going. So at the end of time, and when all is said and done, realizing potential all comes back to people. And this is the part, Michael Slater, that I want you back up here.
Okay. So I'm just going to do a quick wrap up here, and I'm going to do a wrap up with a parable and a challenge for you. So I don't know, some of you may have heard this, you may be familiar with this, and you can participate too. So there's a parable about 5 birds on a wire. So there are 5 birds on a wire, and I'm going to ask for a little interaction here. So I'm going to ask for an answer between 0 and 5. So you can just hold your hands up, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 birds on a wire. One of them decides to fly away. How many birds are left? Okay, 4, 4, 4, 4. Okay, good. So the answer is 5, because one just decided to fly away. And that's an important point, because if there's something that I see when it comes to potential, people and companies, is people decide to do things. They decide to change their life. They decide to go on a diet. They decide to go to the gym. They decide to start a company. They decide to be successful. They don't do it. And to reach your potential, you have to do more than decide. You've got to actually fly away. You've got to fly. And remember that, and don't give up. So I have a challenge for you, and that is, with all that we've shared with you today, I challenge you to recognize innovation, to recognize innovation in people and in companies. You can go look at companies, you can look at people that you know, because it's out there. Learn to recognize innovation in people, in concepts, and in companies. I challenge you to dream backwards. Try it. Go to the end of the story. How does the story end? And then dream backwards. That's how you're going to be able to chart a path to actually do it and be successful. I challenge you to understand that value releases investment. Recognize value. Understand that. You can see it everywhere. Just understand that and you will grow. And finally, execute scalability. Do it. Execute and execute scalability. Do it, fly, and actually find a way to scale, not just grow. Thank you.